Hello, welcome to this webinar on the lockdown mindset. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Zoom already, but let's just do a couple of standard housekeeping bits initially. You've got the option at the bottom to select chat, and I'd encourage that you have that open. I'm going to be asking as we work through the webinar for a few recommends on books and things to listen to around self-development, and chat is going to be the ideal place to put that. If you're going to contribute to chat, can I really encourage that you select at the bottom of the chat panel that it goes to everyone in the meeting rather than just all panelists. And just to do the other standard check, which is that you can hear and see me okay, can I just ask somebody to say something in chat along the lines of, I can hear you, just to make sure we've got the technical bit working okay. Hurrah! Cheers, thank you. It's encouraging. Oh, great. That's loads of people. That's happy days. That's lots of I can hear yous, which is good news. Chat's going to be open. That's mainly going to be for your benefit as participants as we work through the webinar. We're going to run this through a slide deck, and when the slide deck is open, I'm not going to be able to see chat. At the tail end of the webinar, there is going to be a dedicated Q&A session, and you should see another option at the bottom on your control bar there for Q&A. If there are any specific questions that you want to direct to me, can I encourage you drop them in the Q&A section rather than in chat? So let's use chat as something for you to communicate between each other as we work through the webinar. If anybody is interested, if there's some good recommends that come up in there, I'm more than happy to send across all of the text of that chat after the webinar's concluded. The webinar is going to take up no more than 60 minutes of your life. We'll run through a slide deck, we'll run through some key ideas and tips. We'll do that in a second. We'll do some Q&A at the end. We will make sure we are done and dusted by the 3 o'clock mark. You might need to do a little bit of readjusting. I'm going to share screen, and I appreciate that kind of messes up the view a little bit. But just to repeat, anything in chat goes out to everybody else. Make sure, please, you've selected it goes to all panelists and attendees. If there's anything specific for me by way of Q&A, drop it in the Q&A section, and we'll access that towards the tail end, actually, of the webinar. But let's get into it, shall we? And I wanted to start really by saying, obviously, welcome to the webinar, but well done to you lot, because furlough's a weird old thing. 6 months ago, the idea of doing nothing and being at home and being paid 80% of your salary would probably have felt like a great idea. Some of you have been doing it long enough already to realise it's going to be a really challenging period of time. But congratulations to you, because the fact that you are prepared to be furloughed genuinely means that the businesses that you work for have got a better chance of surviving, which in turn means that there is likely going to be an economy left for all of us whenever this picks up and recovers. So you can give yourself a big pat on the back just because of the position which you might not have chosen, but you find yourself in, because it is for the good of all of us. Now, in terms of the way we're going to work through the presentation, I want to give you a quick overview as to who the hell I am in the first instance. We're not going to spend hours, not going to be massively egotistical with this. I'm conscious I'll have trained some of you in the past, some of you I've never met. But my name's Dave Lewis. I'm director, part owner of a business called Enabling Change. We are predominantly a training consultancy, but we specialise within the recruitment sector. And in the good old days, we used to go out and meet people in real life, whereas now we're doing far more by way of Zoom-style webinars, training sessions and coaching. We've also got an online product, virtual training for recruiters, which I would clearly say is a great way of keeping yourself refreshed and up to speed when you're furloughed, when you're working from home, and get yourself ready for the recovery. I'll mention that just briefly later on, because there are some free modules which we're going to open up purely for people who are on furlough right now. I've worked at Enabling Change for 15 years. Prior to that, worked for Reed for 5 years, initially as a consultant, then as one of their internal trainers, and then as Dean and Director of their business school in the Cotswolds. Over the next 60 minutes, the key areas we're going to focus on as we work through the lockdown mindset are really four key areas. First one is crisis mindset. This is the first one. It's the chunkiest one. It's the area I want to spend the most time and energy in, because getting your mentality right to furlough, I think, is incredibly tough. But there's a lot of value you can gain from this period if you tackle it, if you approach it in the right way. We'll also do some work on personal development, some tools and some resources which you might want to dip into to stay on top of your game and to improve yourself through your furlough. Be great to get some recommends from each of you in chat if there's anything you want to add to the list I've put together. We'll do a little bit of work on keeping engaged within your marketplace. I will flag up now and repeat when we get to that stage, I am not and lay no claim to being an employment lawyer. There are some common sense things you can do to retain engagement whilst not working, which is an incredibly important caveat. And just before we do some Q&A at the tail end, we're going to wrap up with a bit of work on your personal recovery plan. Because your mindset through furlough is key, but you want to build to a position where when you do go back into the office and we start work and whatever the new normal looks like, you're ready to hit the ground running. Everything we do is going to be geared towards getting that plan in place. But let's start with the crisis mindset, and let's start with some definitions, some quotes, some ideas of what crisis is all about. First quote I've got for you there, and if anybody in chat can tell me who this quote comes from quicker than it takes to Google it, there's 100 quid for you. Because even when I saw this guy's name, I still had no idea who he is. But this is Rahm Emanuel, former mayor of Chicago. Any crisis does create opportunity for us, and there's scope for you whilst on furlough to be doing things which you've simply not had the time to do to this stage in your career. Now, I'm going to work on the basis that none of us have heard of Rahm Emanuel. You might be more familiar with the next quote, if for no other reason than it was the one that I used to promote the webinar on LinkedIn. And whilst we might not be familiar with Rahm Emanuel, I'm fairly willing to bet that a good portion of you are familiar with Deadpool. And if it comes from him, there's got to be something in it. And it certainly wakes us up. It gives us a jolt, and the news day by day is doing that for us. Perhaps the key quote I'd like you to bear in mind as we go through the webinar, though, is the next one. A crisis is a turning point. The way you turn is down to you. There's several meanings of crisis. Some of them are about it being a time of disaster and doom, and we can all relate to that at the moment. There is another genuine dictionary definition that a crisis is simply a turning point. And that's the key thing I want you to treat this furlough time, this crisis as. The direction of it, in large part, and the way things go is largely down to you. And this quote came from a genuine genius of our time, so I'm sure we can all buy into that one simply. Now, the mindset's going to be critical. And given that that quote came from that particular upstart, there was a bit more wisdom I wanted to share from him, because before we address practical things you can do, getting the mindset right, focusing on the right areas is going to be critical. And there's a phrase you'll likely have heard a lot already and have heard over recent weeks that I want to leave this guy to explain. It's just a quick 2-minute video that was filmed in the good old days when you could actually walk through central London. I referenced just in the first few seconds 20 tips from 20 years for 2020, which is a video series I've been putting together on LinkedIn. All of that's completely free, but there's 5 free videos up, and I'll continue adding to that. But in terms of controlling the controllables, here's what it means in a few quick tips.
Okay, so 20 tips from 20 years in 2020. Tip number 1, control the controllables. Now, it's a cheesy line that we've heard in business, in sport, possibly in training. But I always think the really important bit is the unwritten bit. Don't allow the things that you can't control to influence the things that you can. So we've all had experiences where a deal's dropped out late in the day because a client's changed their mind, where a candidate has taken a counter offer at the last minute, or where you've just been making a batch of sales calls and people have been rude or gatekeepers won't put you through. Easiest thing to do is to take those things personally and to allow them to affect your mood, affect your planning, and affect your activities for the rest of the day. Next time you have a bit of bad luck like that, or a failure, make a list, get a bit of paper, 2 columns. Left-hand column, list all the things you can control. So with a sales call, I can control the planning of the call, the timing of the call, who I'm going to call. I can control very little else in truth. On the right-hand column, I'm going to list all the things that are outside of my control. So I can't control their response, their availability, the questions they ask me. I can't control the objections they throw at me, or whether I get a result, or their mood even. But here's the danger. The things in that right-hand column can quickly start to affect the things in the left-hand. Talk to a few people who are rude, it affects your mood, ultimately affects your numbers, you stop making a call. So control the controllables, try and understand what is and isn't in your control, learn from things where you can, but please don't take personally things you can do nothing about. So, for instance, I can't control the weather in central London. I can't control the fact that people are looking at me in central London like I'm an absolute nutter recording a video. But I can control whether I get the video done and get it posted before the end of the week like I promised.
Okay, so cheers to that, nutter. Now, technically, that is the most complex bit of the whole presentation. I genuinely can't remember whether I clicked the box that said to share computer sound with attendees, there is a very strong likelihood that for the last 2 minutes you've just been watching a guy in silence walking through central London, and I got another live image of me in a smaller box looking slightly, being really quiet and looking slightly anxious and nervous. I still can't see chat, so I'm fully anticipating that when I can, there'll be a flood of people saying, what the hell was that all about? But listen, for what it's worth, that principle of having 2 columns like that, of positives and negatives, that really works well for me, of being able to say what is and what is not in my control. Being able to let go of the things that you can do nothing about is just good general advice for any recruiter. There is, and never more so than for the time being, there's another way of visualizing that beyond just thinking of controlling the controllables, and it's one that many of you are probably familiar with. It was popularized by Stephen Covey in his 7 Habits of Effective People, or Highly Effective People. And that's the circle of control. 3 core circles within there. Central circle, circle of control, which as the name implies, is the things which you can directly control, take responsibility for. Now, put very simply, there's only really 2 things that go in there, and that are your thoughts and your actions. That's all that you can ultimately take control, ownership, and responsibility for. And those are the things we're going to focus on developing as we go through the rest of the webinar. The circle of influence, as the name suggests, not necessarily things that you will be able to control, but things you can influence in some way, shape, or form. And particularly whilst we're on lockdown, while you're furloughed, a lot of your influence is going to be around the events that are literally going on around you in the household. It's going to be on other people within your social circle, within your family group. The circle of concern is the one you can do nothing about, but it is the one that I kind of want to spend the most time on now, because I can't remember a period of time where there's been so much going on which I'm massively interested in, I'm drawn to, but I can fundamentally do nothing about beyond fret, worry, and grow increasingly concerned. And I find myself doing this on a daily basis anytime I put on the news, which I'm probably doing far too frequently. And I think there's a real danger that when we're on furlough time, when we maybe have a bit more time to be introspective and thoughtful, that we invest too much time, effort, and energy, emotional energy, on things we can ultimately do nothing about. So those 2 columns, what you can control and what you can't, actually works really well for me in a practical context. It may or may not work for you, but I would encourage you to try and become a little bit more conscious, at the very least, of times when you're letting your mind drift to things that you can do nothing about. Try and stay grounded in those periods, acknowledge them, but try not to react, try not to snap to them, try and focus back on things that you can influence or ideally control. So with that in mind, here's a few practical tips around getting our kind of our lockdown mindset, our furlough mindset in the right place. If we come to that circle, 5 key things. Create routine and be targeted. Now, I started this webinar by saying that we're gonna touch on this theme of the grass always being greener. And whenever I train recruiters, they hate the idea of routine, they hate the idea of day planners, and they certainly hate the idea of KPIs and targets. But taking a recruiter outside of an environment which is highly targeted and highly routine, and they often struggle with it. So I want you to think about ways in which you can create your own routine. Now, that routine will, of course, look very different from the office routine. But I'm going to take a punt that some of you are routinely doing your exercise with Joe Wicks at 9 o'clock. You might be able to build in some time after that to contact friends or family via WhatsApp. You might be able to build in some personal development time into your time, because it'll give your day structure, it will give them some meaning. Even in terms of targets and KPIs, they're going to be dramatically different, but try and kind of gamify your day. I'm going to read this chapter of this book before I break for lunch. I'm going to try and get 10 more connections on social or on LinkedIn. They'll give you some small wins that you can be focused around. So try and create routine, try and create your own targets, your own little KPIs, your own small wins. Secondly, if at all possible, and particularly if you do become aware, you can acknowledge that the news intake, the things you can be concerned about but fundamentally can't influence or control. If that's having a negative impact on your mindset or your mood, look to ways of limiting your news intake. I'm sure we've all been there over the last few weeks. I certainly have, where I've kind of been running my day waiting for death tolls from different countries, waiting for infection rates. And these are things I can't do anything about, but they come in at so many different periods during the day that I was finding myself kind of stuck on my phone and absorbing every bit of news, making these complex models in my head of what this might mean for the spread of the virus and the epidemiology of it. I'm not an expert in these things, but I was trying to convince myself that I was. I've really restricted my news intake now. So I'm trying to catch up for 10 minutes at the back end of the day after the government press conference and a bit in the morning, but try not to let it overtake my day. Because not only was it overtaking my day, it was overtaking my thinking and dragging me into that circle of concern far too frequently. On a very similar basis, similar theme, you might want to look at managing social media use, whether that's genuine social media or professional media like LinkedIn. If you've got more time on your hands and you've got loads and loads of alerts set up on your phone, my fear is that that can be really damaging to you. We become slaves to our phone, we become slaves to every single notification and pop-up. Again, it drags us into the wrong circle. We end up worrying, we end up fretting, we end up being concerned about things. Really simple measures like taking notifications off of social media or professional media. 6 months ago, way before crisis, I came off Facebook altogether, and genuinely that's done me the world of good, because my phone was frequently telling me that these urgent and important things were going on, but they weren't. It was kidding me. And again, I was investing too much time and energy in those areas. So think about maybe practical ways, admin time maybe, where you can manage social media and even the news. Fourthly, stay connected. We're all in this together. And stay connected with colleagues, of course, but stay connected with friends and family. You'll have family members who are maybe older than you, maybe a bit more isolated than you. And I'm sure most of you have done this already, but things like Zoom, they're not restricted to commercial or work settings. Set up WhatsApp groups for friends and family. Check in on people, because it'll do you the world of good. But there's going to be all sorts of people who are struggling with this in all sorts of different ways and will value being part of a wider societal group. I saw a great post shared on LinkedIn this morning, which really emphasized that social distancing is really the wrong phrase. What we're trying to do at the moment is physical distancing. We shouldn't be distancing ourselves from society, but looking to increasing technological solutions to stay as engaged as is possible with the people who are closest to us. And final point on there, it kind of sounds throwaway, but it's really central to everything. Sleep well, eat well, and exercise. Look after yourselves. The more you exercise, the better you sleep. The better you eat, the better you build up your immunology. Do those three things, the better you'll be able to cope with each day in the crises and the challenges they come. So there's some practical thoughts on how we can go about managing mindset. Try and get into the habit of controlling the controllables, please, and at the very least become aware and identify things that are in that circle of concern and get good at acknowledging them, but ultimately letting them go. Please don't dwell on them for too long. Second element of the webinar that I want to address, actually, let's finish the first one. This was my best slide as well. In wrapping up on the crisis mindset, you have an option about how you address furlough time. Here's option one. You can go into hibernation. You can do nothing but Netflix, read magazines, catch up with mates, go on the PS4. And there's a fair option there. It might sound attractive, at least in the short term, but I think it'll get old pretty quickly. It's also going to result in you getting to the stage, or us getting to the stage where there is a recovery and you call back into work, but you're going to be lazy and sluggish. It's going to require wake-up time. So I want you to make sure you've got a good mindset, a strong mindset towards being furloughed. Look at this as being a really key opportunity for you to practice your skill set. Train yourself, develop yourself, improve yourself. Because you know what recruitment environments are like. They're fast-paced. In recruitment, we all know we should spend more time training and developing. We never do it because we're too busy, and we learn mostly on the job. Use this opportunity to train and develop. If you look at any top-class sports teams, the reason they're often successful is because the quantity and the intensity of training that they're able to do during their close season. When it comes to them actually doing the job and performing in matches, they're at their peak. They're match fit, they're match sharp. So at least please use this as opportunity to stay as match fit as possible. Ramp up your training, ramp up your personal development, and rather than see this as hibernatory time, welcome to your close season. This is the period between matches where you should be training, developing, and improving as best you possibly can. That genuinely concludes the first bit. So let's start focusing on personal development. And in terms of personal development, a few core areas that I'd like to work through. What do we read, listen, watch, and how do we train? And to look at other options which are not really about kind of personal development in a career sense at all. I'd really encourage, if you've got any recommends in any of these areas that you can drop into chat, that could be really helpful to other attendees on the webinar. But for what it's worth, use a few thoughts from me, a few recommendations, and let's start with some reads. Now, 4 books I'd encourage you to maybe pick up and take a look at. And the first one, I'm going to level with you on. I shouldn't be recommending this. I have yet to read it. It's only been released in the last month or two. It's a book called Top Biller by an author called Steve Guest. Now, Steve is a genuine recruiter. He's a construction recruiter and he's UK based. I frequently, when I'm training, get asked to recommend recruitment books. And it's something I always struggle with, largely because most of the ones I've read I really don't like very much. An awful lot of them are written by North Americans, and there's a real challenge in stripping away the layers of cheese. Now, the only reason I'm comfortable sharing something and recommending something that I've not read, everyone who I know who has read it is more than comfortable recommending it to me. I am genuinely waiting for my copy to arrive because of Amazon delays. But Steve, like I say, he's a genuine guy. He's a construction builder in the UK. I've chatted with him. I know he's a good guy. So on that basis, I'm comfortable recommending it. I'm hoping, I saw a few things pop up in chat. I'm hoping that was a few of you saying, I read it and that's actually quite good. Because if anyone's saying, I read it, it was rubbish, I can't really quarrel with you, but it completely invalidates my first pick. Generally, when I'm asked for recommendations, I veer towards books which don't have anything to do with recruitment, but whereby there are some transitional ideas. And with that in mind, my second recommendation is a book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. Now, this was written in 2014. I'd strongly recommend this for anyone in recruitment, anyone in business, because it's really the idea of passion and perseverance in trying to achieve and pursue a higher purpose. A lot of grit is about your resilience and your tenacity, and you know better than I how important those traits are in recruitment in normal times. Now, Grit is one of those books which was written 4 years ago, but I'd argue almost takes on more relevance in the crisis we're in, where some of the traits that it promotes are going to be more important and more emphatic. Every time I see chat come up now, I just get really nervous that it's someone saying, yeah, read it, waste of time, mate. Don't agree with your recommends. I'll have a good look at those at the tail end. There is a section in there, although it's not recruitment specific, there's a section in there on grit for a sales consultant. And some of that is absolutely, it's directly transitional, whereas the themes themselves work really, really well for recruiters. Third book I'd mention, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. This is one that's been doing the rounds quite a bit over the last few months. Again, it's not recruitment or sales specific. It is around sales. It's around sales negotiation. But it's written by this guy, Chris Voss. Now, he does fall into the North American category where there might be a layer of cheese, but he was an FBI hostage negotiator. This guy's got a career. He's got some stories to tell. And it's amazing how much of it will translate to the day in, day out. Personally, the bits that I found most valuable, he's very good at getting granular. And he's very good at looking at use of specific language and words, what words are effective and impactful, and what kind of language is to be avoided in the context of sales or negotiation. So there's a lot of really granular but important stuff you can pick up from Never Split the Difference. And the final one I wanted to recommend, again, a few years old now, I think probably about 2015, a book called Bounce by an author called Matthew Syed. Now, I couldn't very well do a list of books without getting at least one which has some sporting resonance and relevance within it. Matthew Syed, you may or may not be familiar with, but amongst other things, he writes, he's a sports columnist. He's got a podcast with Freddie Flintoff and Robbie Savage. But he kind of made his name as a table tennis player, hence the title here, Bounce. And he was in Olympics teams, Commonwealth Games teams as an international competitor. And the mindset behind Bounce is an idea which you see in books like Grit. You'll see in work by Malcolm Gladwell. And it's really the idea that talent is massively overrated. that what we get in life comes not from our innate talent, but it comes from the work and the effort and the energy we put into improving. Many of you will have heard about the 10,000 hour rule, the idea that to become expert at something, you need to put in 10,000 hours of focused practice. And this particular book, I think, is a really good addition, if you like, to that kind of theme. If you look at any child prodigies over the ages, whether that's Tiger Woods, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Cristiano Ronaldo, the one thing they've all got in common, hours and hours and hours and hours of focused practice. So there's 4 read recommends. I'm sure, I would hope at least that there were some recommends popping up in chat around literature that you can take on board rather than just sagging off my choices. But there's 4 starters if you've got a bit of time on your hands and you enjoy reading. Not for everybody, I appreciate. So let's think about what we listen as well, because there's a hell of a lot of free content out there by way of podcasts and an awful lot of recruitment specific stuff, which is free, is massively valuable and is worth you dipping into. And I'd argue that probably the 3 best known recruitment podcasts are my first 3 recommends. The Recruitment Roller Coaster by Hisham Azzouz. Now, some of you will probably know Hisham. He's very prominent on LinkedIn. He's probably done some training with some of you around personal branding, particularly around your use of LinkedIn. The Recruitment Roller Coaster podcast is essentially interviews with business owners and with successful recruiters. And I'd suggest it works because A, he gets some good guests, but B, Hisham's just a really likable, enthusiastic guy. And that very much comes across in the curiosity of the questions he asks. A similar vein, really, the RAG podcast by Sean Anderson. Sean and Hisham used to work together in the early days of Hoxo Media. Sean runs a very similar podcast, in truth, interviews with business leaders and business owners. He has massively stepped up his game over the last couple of weeks, and he's doing daily podcasts with industry leaders. Now, the great thing with both Hisham and Sean's podcast is not just their immediate relevance, but they've both got really extensive back catalogues. There's an awful lot for you to dip into. And I'd encourage, have a listen to both, because you'll at least find which of their styles you perhaps prefer. And similarly, Recruiter Startup by Dwelter Doherty, that's been around for a couple of years. So again, lots and lots of content in there. Tends to take the form of interviews with business leaders. I would strongly encourage you to have a listen to at least 1 or 2 episodes from each of those series if you've not done so already. You'll learn from them. They'll keep you engaged, particularly the up-to-date ones with what's going on in the marketplace, and they're free. Did I mention that already? As a 4th recommend, because everyone's got a podcast, right? I've launched my own podcast, and we recorded episode 3 this morning called Recruiters Lunch Club. This is off the back of a Wednesday lunchtime lunch club I've been running for the last couple of weeks, which is really just a networking group for recruiters who are working from home, furloughed, or have been made redundant. We're running that tomorrow. It is capped at 25, and last week was the second week. We're up to about 19, so we may well get up to top limit on that. But if anyone wants to take a look at that, you're very welcome. If anyone wants to have a listen to the podcast, it is a different format to the other 3. It's not talking to industry leaders. It's essentially 3 people who work in recruitment shooting the breeze about what's gone on that week. And whilst there is a recruitment focus, we also shoot the breeze about the really important stuff like Tiger King, what people have been up to that week, how working from home is when you're working alongside, or one of your housemates happens to be one of your recruitment competitors. So I would suggest there's a lot of real life in that, and it might just be a little bit of a break from the slightly more professional podcasts that are out there for you. Again, if anyone's got any additional recommends, because there are loads of recruitment pods out there now, there'll be loads more launching over the next few weeks, I would suggest as well. Thirdly, let's get into some stuff to watch. Now, I'm going to work on the basis you're all in LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, of course you are, because A, you're recruiters, and B, that's how you find out about this particular webinar. If you're on LinkedIn, you've probably come across Mark Gaisford and Red Sprout at some stage. Now, Red Sprout is a recruitment firm. They're a marketing recruitment business. Mark is the owner. They're doing an incredible amount of content. They're running webinars. He does live shows at, I think, 3 o'clock. So you might catch this afternoon's live shows through his LinkedIn channel as well. One of the great things about the webinars he's done is that all of the content gets put on the Red Sprout YouTube channel. A lot of it is recruitment specific. So for instance, last Friday, I think it was, he did a recruitment live where he had a number of key speakers. So people like Mitch Sullivan, who's a copywriting trainer, Sean Anderson from the podcast from Moxo Media was on there. And it was, again, really good live session, interactive session. If you didn't catch it, you can get that content on YouTube. As a linked point and linked to this, there are loads of webinars popping up on LinkedIn, left, right, and center. I would suggest the challenge for you is not going to be finding them, but finding the time to do all of the ones that you want to do. There'll be a real challenge in whittling down content there. Inevitably, there'll be some that are recruitment specific, some that are more specific to your marketplace, so will help to drive some engagement. YouTube, hours and hours and hours and hours of content on there. There is loads of recruitment training available on there as well. And again, there'll be some personal preference in this as to the kind of training style you like, the kind of information you like. There is a guy, a North American again, a guy called Scott Love, who's got a YouTube channel. He's been around for years. There's loads of content on there. But again, it's a nice way of kind of doing some training in the background, in essence. And fourthly, Netflix and chill. I'm very conscious the nature of this webinar. I've put together as much kind of as many professional assets, as much professional resource as such as I could manage. But look after yourselves. And part of that is genuinely going to be about finding some time to tune out. Even though it's furlough, I still think, by the way, some people seem to be running their lives. There's a real risk of burnout through volunteering and catching up on webinars and trying to stay vital and engaged. Find time to tune out. Tiger King, I got persuaded to watch the first episode last week. I think it was the first hour of the last 3 weeks where I've genuinely not thought about anything more meaningful than what was going on TV. I've also, as my sacrifice to the household, given up Sky Sports and traded it in for Disney Plus on the pretense of keeping my 2-year-old boy happy. In actuality, there's loads of Star Wars stuff on there as well. So find some ways of kind of watching some stuff, even if it's pretty low rent, to tune out, particularly at the back end of the day. A few other options that I wanted to highlight beyond the kind of professional stuff that we might take on board, and a nod, of course, towards training beyond just the toilet roll challenge that you may well have seen many people attempting over recent weeks. To try and retain engagement with training you've done previously. You're going to have some time on your hands to review any previous training you've done. So maybe booking some time once a day, once a week to go through previous training notes, training booklets for courses perhaps you've attended or internal training you've worked on. Think about maybe ways in which you can run some in-company masterclasses. On furlough, you're fully entitled to do training. And whilst you'll hopefully be catching up with colleagues in the office, look for ways in which you can run some Zoom or some Teams-based stuff where you're running masterclasses and training sessions between yourselves. You might find that helps with routine. If once a week you're able to book something in, you can do that in company. You can look to external provision for it as well. And I've worked with some firms who I think have been very sharp at trying to get candidates and clients they've got a good relationship with engaged with some of the training they're doing, so that they're leading some of the training sessions or getting involved in some of the Zoom meetings to give a perspective from candidates and clients within the marketplace as to how they're coping with the crisis. I mentioned at the front end of the webinar, we've got a virtual training for recruiters product, which is an online training platform. There's modules on pretty much every facet in recruitment in there, which you can access in your own time. If anybody is interested in finding out more about that, we're trying to make some modules free for furloughed recruiters at the moment. It's taken us a bit longer than we'd like because unfortunately it's a bit more complex than we thought it was going to be to kind of free these things up. But if anybody would like access to modules or find out more about that resource, do drop me a line after the webinar or via LinkedIn or drop me an email at dlewis@enablingchange.co.uk. So listen, there's some ways of developing yourselves in a predominantly professional capacity, but here's a few other quick thoughts. Look to some other options. And there's stuff you can look at doing which has got nothing to do with the profession, with recruitment whatsoever. It's been massively inspiring to see the number of recruiters on furlough who've been volunteering. And there might be scope for you to be able to build that in. Going back 3 or 4 days ago, there was a sudden spate of furloughed recruiters who started volunteering for the NHS. And I can't think of a better way to spend furlough time. But whether for the NHS or for local charities, it will keep you engaged, it'll keep your brain in gear, and it adds to your skill set. It's only going to make you more attractive, more valued by your current employer as well. Learn new skills. I've got a good feeling that some training firms who train languages in particular are probably in boom time at the moment, because by the looks of things, if we're not learning new languages, we're learning how to bake bread. So there might be some skills that you've been meaning to pick up, and you might be able to block time aside to build those into your daily routines as well. Maybe have some fitness goals whilst we've still got this, the one exercise period a day rather. Think about how you can use that. I'm very aware that for some of my friends, the idea of just doing one bit of exercise a day was really depressing to them. For other people, doing one bit of exercise a day is at least 7 more pieces of exercise than they would do in a normal week. So set your goals accordingly. But do try and be mindful of ways of keeping your brain engaged. Some of them will be recruitment focused. Others will have nothing or very little to do with recruitment whatsoever. But again, any ideas on other options for personal development and growth during this period would be great to hear more about those in the chat. The 3rd and 4th stages of this webinar, I want to go through a little bit more pace. We're going to do less content on these for fairly obvious reasons, I would hope. Then we'll get into the Q&A in the next 5 minutes or so. But try and keep yourself engaged. Some of the things we've already talked about are going to help you with that, but look at ways of keeping engaged with what's going on from a work perspective. This again is where I really want to re-emphasize that I am not an employment law specialist and lay no claim to be. But you can keep engaged on LinkedIn, but be careful. For what it's worth, if I were offering advice, which I'm not, that advice would be to be as conservative as possible with the way in which you use LinkedIn. If necessary, just be an observer, look at what's going on, stay in touch with your market in that way. But I'd be very, very careful of content creation. HMRC have been reasonably clear about you not being able to do anything which generates revenue or promotes your business. I think we've got to be really, really mindful of observing the rules on this one. I've seen a lot of areas talk, a lot of recruiters and a lot of general questioning about shades of grey, and very much with my trainer's hat on, if you think it's a shade of grey, either don't do it or at least check in with somebody in a work setting to check that it's okay for you to do. But if in doubt, don't do it. Having said that, I have seen some recruiters who've been furloughed creating brilliant content, but it's been about their experience of being on furlough, about how they're spending their time and how their days have changed rather than it being work focused. So it's a valuable tool, but I'd veer towards the social end of social media there rather than the professional end for obvious reasons. Try and make sure you're absorbing trade press, whether it's online or offline, whether it's magazines, publications. Make sure you're signed up to the kind of information you should be signing up to anyway. But again, great way of keeping your head in the game, just having a look through trade magazines and journals at the moment to keep sure you are abreast of what is going on within your marketplace. And look to networking groups, forums, lunch clubs. And again, think in those two markets, the recruitment industry, but also the industry that you recruit for, because there'll be activities which you can get involved in, webinars as well in either of those areas, which you find to have some involvement with. And hopefully your organisations are doing regular company meetings and catch-ups to retain that engagement and make sure they're reaching out to you. For what it's worth, there seems to have been a real return to the good old days of beer in particular, beer sessions amongst the group, and quizzes to drive involvement with all of our staff, whether working from home or furloughed at the moment. So try and look at ways of keeping engaged. Make sure you have some degree of clarity as when that becomes work. Stay the right side of the line in that sense. And the final area I wanted to focus on is your recovery plan. Now, right from the outset, I want to stress that I wouldn't encourage you to spend hours of your life at this stage thinking about your plan for when things, economically at least, start to return to whatever new normal looks like. For a simple reason, things are changing rapidly. And if you put a plan together now for how you're going to storm your desk when you get back into the office, the likelihood is that plan's going to be redundant within days, never mind weeks or potentially months. So here's some core ideas just to give you some food for thought. I don't think it hurts to have an awareness of these, but for those reasons, don't spend too much time, effort and energy on this, please, at this point. Think about these maybe a little bit later down the line. But any recovery plan, start with where you want to be. Now, with that in mind, you might want to do some exercise to kind of segment your marketplace. Some of the personal development, some of the magazines, some of the content you'll have looked at should start giving you a little bit of feel as to which parts of your market are more resilient than others, which clients you'll feel more comfortable in picking up the phone to as and when that time comes, and which you're probably better off leaving alone for a period of time to enable them to recover. So break your marketplace down using the information that you've got. And if you've not heard this word already, you're likely to hear it an awful lot over the next few weeks, and that's to pivot. Now, pivoting is where we can kind of pivot our business or our desk or our services to different markets or different portions of the market. So it could be, and a reasonable pivot could be that you're in a business maybe that does permanent contract recruitment. And it could be that you think, do you know what, I might want to pivot a bit more if I've got some choice towards contract, if I feel that that is going to be more resilient or pick up more quickly. If you've got that option, that for me becomes a sensible pivot. But something I want you to be very, very wary of is what I call panic pivoting. I saw a lot of this after the financial crisis 10 years or more ago, whereby companies, recruitment organisations and individuals were in sectors that really struggled. And they pivoted, but they pivoted by leaping out of that segment altogether and leaping into a brand new segment that they had no knowledge of, no experience of, and no networking. And you're pretty much dooming yourselves to failure there. So look at ways in which you can pivot your offering, but please, 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 within reason. Make sure you're giving yourself a fighting chance rather than dooming yourself to failure. Thirdly, think about who your target prospects are going to be. And think about this in terms of candidates and clients. For recruiters in many markets who've been in the industry for less than a decade, frankly, you've probably only ever worked in a candidate-led market. And whilst there's no real certainty at the moment, it seems a reasonable bet that we're going to shift into a far more client-led marketplace. So who are the clients you're going to need to approach? Are there any candidates who, even in spite of change in the economy, stay high demand, who we should be trying to approach and build relationships with at the start of our recovery? So who are your target prospects going to be, both in terms of your candidates and clients? Having identified them, think about how you're going to target them. Because let's face it, there's not going to be like a UK recovery day where we're suddenly all into the office and we all pick up as normal. But as we get back into some kind of new normality, as that recovery starts, there's a real danger that absolutely everybody is going to be hammering the phone straight away to exactly the same prospects and targets. So think about your line of attack. Are you going to be using social? Are you going to be using LinkedIn? Are you going to be using the phone? Are you going to be candidate marketing? But think carefully about how you will initiate that contact, because the final question I'll put on there is, how will you differentiate? Now, the sad truth of this crisis is that some recruitment firms are just not going to get through it. The number of recruitment businesses out there has gone up dramatically in recent years. Last year alone, 2019, according to Companies House, there were just short of 9,000 new recruitment organisations registered through the course of the year. Now, I don't remember anyone in 2018 in recruitment saying, the thing we need more of in our marketplace is a bit more competition. It was competitive already. Now, some of those recruiters, those businesses just won't make it through this, but a good proportion will. It's still going to be incredibly competitive. And particularly, as I've mentioned, when we start that recovery, there's going to be a lot of sales activity taking place. So how are you going to target people? How are you going to make your message different to everyone else out there? To stress again with your planning, these are food for thought. I've gone through some big subject areas there really, really quite quickly. And to give food for thought rather than to give you granular detail at this stage, because this is likely going to become much more relevant a little bit further down the kind of cycle. There's a strong likelihood that if there's interest in it, that we'll do another webinar around some of those themes and some work around engagement with the marketplace at perhaps a more appropriate time. That's why those sessions were short in this webinar. But we've come towards the end of the webinar, so we'll try and get into some Q&A. This is likely when I realised that pretty much everyone dropped out mid-session, or we had a problem with the technology. I've just opened up I've opened up the chat, and there's a fair bit in there. There's some good recommends, and like I say, I can make that chat chat text available to anyone if they want any of those recommendations. In terms of Q&A, Lou D has very kindly said, you could hear it, Dave, which I'm really encouraged about. That's really good news. I'm glad that's the first thing I saw. Does anyone have any questions that they wanted to kind of throw to me or potentially throw to the group in wrapping up? Because I'll kind of give it a minute or so for anything to pop up in chat or the questions and answers session. If there is stuff, we'll try and address it. If not, we'll draw to a close there. But any key questions in Q&A or in chat? Okay, I'll give it 5 more seconds. Dave, how did you initially react when all this started? Cheers, Mark. Geez. I'm trying to think, when all of this started is really difficult, isn't it? Because was that 2 weeks ago? Was it 3 weeks ago? Was it a month or so ago? Because at one level, it kind of crept up on us, but there seemed to be a real quick tipping point where suddenly we were down in that crisis. And I'd love to say that I reacted with good grace and intelligence. I did what most people did, and I just panicked. And I thought, what the hell is going on? And I do fear that there was probably quite a lot of panic in those first couple of weeks, and panic's never good because it leads to snap decisions. I'm also aware, and I'm very conscious, I'm talking to recruiters who've been furloughed here, that my initial reaction, and my reaction up until very recently, were just throw myself into work, keep busy, keep doing stuff. And that was my effort to take control over certain things. It was only last weekend where I genuinely had a couple of days whereby I wasn't working and started really, I guess, processing a bit what was going on in the wider world. And I was speaking to somebody when we were recording the podcast this morning who had a very similar experience. And he said that very process of really engaging with what was going on had just left him feeling pretty glum about life. So in short, panic, longer answer, throw myself into my work, and I'm trying now not to burn out. What would your day look like if you were a recruiter on furlough? Joe Wicks. Okay, Joe Wicks is a given. I've got a 2-year-old boy. If I was on furlough, my wife's on furlough, so she's got pretty much all the childcare responsibility. I get to do fun stuff like webinars and put content together. If I was on furlough, there'd be a lot more time there. But, and I'm very aware actually, from an anonymous attendee, that question, I'm very aware actually that some of you will have kids, and that creates all sorts of different dynamics and challenges. If me and my wife were on furlough, part of our daily routine, we'd be blocking in periods whereby one of us was taking key responsibility for looking after the little lad, so the other one could do some personal development or go for a walk or go for a run or just chill out a bit. So I struggle to give you detail, I guess, as a recruiter on furlough, but I'm pretty confident, as well as family and life stuff, I'd be trying to build in a couple of hours probably a day to do some degree of personal development. The exercise would be in there for me as well. I'd love to be doing a run a day, but I'm doing a run every other day, and then every other day going out for a family walk. How are you keeping positive on furlough with uncertainty? What will happen after May? Can I throw that one out to the group and maybe to respond in chat? Because I'm not on furlough and you guys are, so you'll have better quality answers. So just to repeat the question, how are you keeping positive on furlough with uncertainty? What will happen after May? Okay, I think that's a 2-parter. How are you keeping positive on furlough with uncertainty? Let me throw that out to you, any answers in chat. What will happen after May? I know the answer to this. Nobody knows. And if anybody tells you with certainty, here's what's going to happen in June or July or May, they are lying. They are making it up. Nobody knows. Now, I would suggest that the furlough scheme was introduced when restaurants and bars had to shut down. And so there's a logic, which may well be disproved, that says that this scheme may well be extended until we get to a point of those opening up. So will life change much after May? I really don't know. But it's partly why, going back to the circle of concern, I discourage you from making too many plans at this stage, because things are changing so dramatically, they're likely going to go out the window. And in terms of both business planning and home planning for us, we're genuinely repeating this mantra of let's take each day as it comes, more so at home, and then work mindset, take each week as it comes. A couple of answers in chat. Tom says, I found that keeping a routine is key. I've just bought a guitar to keep myself busy. Ha ha ha. Right. For full on David Brentness, Tom, there you go. Gets the guitar out in training. Brilliant thing for personal development, because I bought a guitar when I was 16 and the intention was I'd pick it up and I'd immediately be awesome. It takes lots and lots of hours of practice, but block that into your daily routine if at all possible. Meg Smith, write a to-do list every day, tick it off as it gives you a sense of achievement. I think that's a brilliant one. It ties in with the routine. Just that sense of ticking things off, I'd suggest, is really valuable. And Tina Blunsden, chatting to positive people and focusing on what I can do rather than what I cannot, and baking lots of cakes. I don't know if you, Tina, share the cake, says Mark. Yeah, good. You can see the chat. Why am I reading this out? I did see something yesterday whereby sales of bread makers have gone up over 500%. So in terms of where we're going to pivot to, don't all jump into recruiting bread makers, right? Let's not go into the bakery sector, but do sort of keep an eye on that as a back burner. What parts of the market and the economy in general are resilient and doing well? Which parts are struggling? So I think over time we'll start to maybe pivot more sensibly. What's been the hardest thing for you? Personally, the change of daily routine has been most challenging, getting into a new one. The hardest thing for me, genuinely, and this is where I'd love to say I empathise. I struggle to empathise, but I sympathise. The hardest thing for me was the couple of days of not working, because then I feel like I'm giving up my control, which is why if I was furloughed, I'd be constructing routines, so I felt like I had something that I could control and manage. What areas of training do you think are most important for us to brush up on so that we're ready to go when the market turns? Yeah, great question, Emma. And I'll give you two answers on this, because I first answer I run the risk of doing myself out of a job. I'd be wary of spending huge chunks of time on skills training at the moment, only because it's almost certainly going to be weeks, it might be months before you're back and actually doing the job. And if you invest large chunks of time into skills-based training at the moment, best will in the world, you're likely going to have forgotten it when you get back in the office. So any skills-based stuff, I'd encourage, keep it brief, do it as a refresher. This is not intended as an out-and-out plug, but that is a gap where things like e-learning, whatever platform you use, or even if you don't, maybe try and find some e-learning, is often quite useful. So you're looking at maybe 20, 30-minute chunks of time there to refresh and keep yourself in the game. I would suggest that in terms of areas to look at, the market's going to shift. A sort of reference that I would suggest and suspect we're going to shift in many cases from being candidate-led to being client-led, and start now maybe doing short sessions around things like sales calls, cold calls, BD, whatever euphemism you want to put to it, but at least start brushing up on client sales, because just leveling with you, I think we're going to have to spend more time, effort, and energy in that than maybe has been the case over recent months. But for what it's worth, over the next few weeks, I'd just look at some webinars around mindset, around sort of engagement with your marketplace. Maybe do little bits of skills training, but build it in once a week. As we get closer to a potential recovery, that might be the time to step those kind of things up. But I'd certainly be focusing on client side predominantly, just to completely hedge my bets and potentially give you a non-answer, Emma. Also think about how you're going to talent pool when you get back in, because there's going to be an awful lot of candidates out there, but your ability to quickly get to the quality ones is probably never going to be more valuable. Anything in particular you can recommend for people with 3 months or less experience whilst on furlough and when we get back to normal? This sounds counterintuitive, Rachel, but people who are new to this and new to recruitment, I think weirdly will have a bit of advantage when they get back to the office, and the advantage that you will have, no different. So when we're thrown back into it, you'll learn in in just an incredibly tough environment. I still think in terms of recession recruiters who plied their trade, started their careers during the last recession, and my God, a lot of those guys are still around, and it's no coincidence. It's because they're tough. They learn how to do the job in the toughest conditions imaginable. So with limited experience, don't throw yourself in, for reasons just mentioned Thomas' question, into sales training. But I'd start by just kind of mentally preparing yourself for the fact you're probably going to have to do a lot more business development, of putting yourself out there. You're going to be doing a job where you end up getting more negativity and rejection than might have been the case in the first couple of months. But there is a silver lining here, which is that if you can prove yourself in that market, when things recover, which they will do, no one knows when, but they will recover, you'll be in a much stronger position. How are people feeling about being furloughed? Again, can I throw that out to chat if anyone's got anything they can chuck in there? For me, staying positive means having a day plan that you can achieve and be in control of. A lot of these are from anonymous attendee, which might be a variety of them, but an anonymous attendee is either a very, very unusual name, but I mean, you speak a lot of sense. Have no regrets, as once this is over, you'll probably wish for this time back to be able to think clearly. You know, that grass is always greener. There was a great video a lot of you will have seen on social, and it was produced by a company, I think called The Social Company, which in essence was how we're going to look back on this period in 12 months' time, at a time when we've got to spend time with families and to learn and Joe Wicks and these kind of things. I bet you there'll be an element of that. Doesn't feel like it at the moment, but yeah, I bet we will look back on this with a degree of rose-tinted glasses. But what types of group collaboration calls, video calls, would be the best use of time and most useful for teams? I struggle a bit on this. I can certainly give you an idea of the things that recruiters are doing, and an awful lot of the engagement with teams at the moment is tending to be on things which are just different to the norm. And it's not updates, obviously, and how's your week been, but there's so many quizzes, pub quizzes, but bear in mind there's scope to have pub quizzes on what's the capital of Namibia, but there's also scope to have pub quizzes around what's going on within your marketplace as an exercise in keeping ourselves engaged. First one to put the capital of Namibia in Windhoek wins an unspecified prize. And as I mentioned in the webinar, beers on a Friday and any kind of group, you know, pubs, those kind of things, anything like that, just to keep people engaged, and some positivity is key. I did a training session with furloughed recruiters yesterday, where one of the girls in particular was genuinely living in a one-bed apartment in a tower block in Birmingham. She was scared to leave the building because it was a busy part of town and social distancing was pretty much impossible. And if you've got people in your teams who are, because of the nature of where they live, more isolated than others, just anything you can do to get them engaged, I think is important. I've never, although it was Zoom-based, there were 12 people, I think, on that training session yesterday. I've never seen people so pleased to see me. It was nuts. And, you know, they're just so, you know, crying out for engagement. So I hope that answers at least a little. And then, Chris, would you prioritise cold calling existing clients or new clients to expand the network for BD? A challenging one to answer, Chris, because it will depend a bit on the nature and the maturity of your desk. With experienced recruiters and recruiters who are still working, I'd suggest a lot of their engagement at the moment is going to be with the existing clients, because I mean, a cold call at this stage of the cycle, I just think is going to be really, really difficult for you to run or for you to make. When we get back in, I think existing clients is going to be a weird thing in and of itself, because it might be several months before you've done anything with them. So I'd probably prioritize those guys because there is a relationship, but I'd probably also want to go in with a mindset that I can probably have some good chats with those guys to sort of touch base, see how they've got on, see how they're prepping for the recovery. But you're probably not going to have conversations with them immediately about, you know, by the way, you're hiring. Because although we might have a recovery day as recruiters, bear in mind there's probably going to be a lag time for your clients. And at the very least, you know, in that lag time, you might find you can naturally find more time there to do more BD for new clients. I'm not sure that answers the question brilliantly. But listen, we are 59 minutes in, so we'll draw to a close there. Sophie McKenzie wins the unspecified prize by coming up with Windhoek as being the capital of Namibia. I hope you didn't cheat on that one. Please, please, please. I hope this has been a useful hour of your time, if nothing else. If there's any questions or feedback, please shout me on LinkedIn. If anyone wants a copy of the chat log, equally give me a shout on that, because I've worked out how to use Zoom and I can ping that across as a text document if anyone wants any of these recommends. Do give me a shout with any. I know Sophie, she wouldn't cheat. Well, you say that. Sophie might have logged in twice now, who knows? But yeah, do give me a shout with any questions or queries. There's every chance we'll do some more of these webinars if you feel they've been of value in a few weeks' time. But listen, take care, stay safe, try and look after yourselves over the next few weeks. there are some things which are much more important even than recruitment, and stay healthy, keep fit, look after yourselves. Cheers, guys. Thanks very much for your time. Catch up soon.